It's 3.5 hours into the ceasefire. In northern Israel, an interceptor lands. Israel claims it shot down 3 incoming Iranian missiles. Minimal damage, nobody hurt. But he is now furious. The commander-in-chief had gone to bed telling the world he'd ended a war.
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. We basically have 2 countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
Fury at Iran and Israel because of its retaliation, bombing, it said, a communications site near the Iranian capital. But don't panic, Mr. President. The message today from the man who used to run Israel's National Security Council.
I believe that the real ceasefire is achieved, and there might be some kind of misunderstanding, some kind of ambiguity, maybe a very, very symbolic Israeli retaliation, which I don't think is important, but some people think...
Dangerous.
Yes, but in the end of the day, if we retaliate, it will be only in order to say we shot last, which, as far as I'm concerned, it is the least important matter.
Dawn in Tel Aviv, the last hours before the 7 a.m. ceasefire. An air raid siren soundtrack as Iran, like Israel, attacked right down to the deadline. One of their missiles at least got through an hour south in Be'er Sheva. 4 people killed and at least 22 injured. One of the dead, an off-duty soldier, Israel's only known military fatality in the war with Iran.
No doubt this barrage of missiles from Iran, a face-saving exercise, a message that the regime remains undefeated in the face of what they see as Israel's aggression. For Israel, another bomb site and a search, possibly, for bodies entombed in the rubble.
Search and rescue teams moving gingerly up the gutted tower block. Intelligence sources told us the warhead here was 700 kilos of explosive. The path of the blast, all too evident.
We sent our bomb squads to remove any secondary explosives that might endanger the first responders, to clear dangerous fragments. And you can see IDF search and rescue teams still going floor by floor of this building that took a direct hit.
Back in Tel Aviv, the contradictions of war are jarring. So many shops here closed for the past 13 days. And yet life's still a beach and goes on, of course, albeit with few tourists to crowd the waves these days. So what do people here make of this shaky ceasefire now, after almost 2 weeks of mutual bombardment?
I think Iran government and must to go.
The Iranian government must go.
Iranian government go.
Right.
The finish,
regime change.
Yeah, it's not impossible.
I'm not sure. I don't trust neither of the sides. So
You don't trust either side?
no. For example, like I'm not gonna go away like from the shelter today or the next day.
In my opinion, I think they shouldn't be blown up. Everyone should live in peace. We need a little peace here because we've been through a lot this last year, and we need peace and quiet.
But no Arab or Palestinian would give their opinion on camera. Not here, not now. Reticence is also eloquence. Because war, of course, continues. 13 days in Iran it might be, but 626 in Gaza now, and no end in sight.
Well, classified briefings for House and Senate members by White House intelligence officials, which were due to be held this afternoon, have reportedly been postponed while lawmakers on both sides are divided on President Trump's decision to wade into the war. I spoke to some of those senators earlier. So do they think a ceasefire will hold?
Can I get a show of hands of how many people trust Iran? You ain't gonna get anybody to vote for that.
Was the president right to bomb Iran then?
Was he right?
Yeah,
he was right.
Here's a guy that took a historic decision that not many people would have taken to try to bring peace to the Middle East and actually make the world a safer place, and I'm very proud of what he did.
Was bombing Iran constitutional?
Absolutely.
We don't know where the uranium is. We don't know if we destroy these sites. And we don't know if the Iranians are going to race to the development of a nuclear weapon, and we wind up with a situation that's similar to what we're dealing with North Korea. The challenge, though, is where's the president getting his advice from? He doesn't have a national security advisor. He has a DNI that doesn't show up to all the meetings, and he's got Pete Hegseth. And I see that as a big problem.
I am deeply concerned that this ceasefire may be more in Donald Trump's imagination than in reality.
Do you think the president knows what he's doing when it comes to Iran?
I hope he knows what he's doing. I think that he is operating in some ways as a free agent without the involvement of a seasoned national security team. I am deeply concerned that chaos and confusion seem to be the United States brand of foreign policy right now.
I think he did a fantastic decision. I think his plan worked out perfectly. I think he's doing a really good job of not only advancing our interests, but also protecting Israel at the same time.
Do you believe the president has played it right?
I think the president should not have gotten the U.S. into an offensive war against Iran without coming to Congress, especially since there was no urgency, according both to our own intel and the Israeli foreign minister. Iran was far away from having a nuclear weapon, but maybe it wasn't about the nuclear weapon at all. Maybe it was about what President Trump said about regime change. But if that's the case, that's even more troubling. We already regime changed in Iran in 1953, and that's one of the reasons why the U.S.-Iranian relationship has been so bad for the last 70 years.
Do you think this is really about the Nobel Peace Prize? Well, after Donald Trump's apparent frustration with the Israeli government earlier today, some of his MAGA allies have also been piling into Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Our correspondent Kieran Moodley is with me. Kieran.
Yes, well, Chris, you were talking to Republicans on Capitol Hill, but away from Washington. If you take someone like Steve Bannon, Donald Trump's former advisor, he was very much opposed to America bombing in Iran, and he definitely didn't want regime change. What's interesting in the last 24 hours with this fragile ceasefire and Donald Trump's anger at Benjamin Netanyahu is that someone like Steve Bannon has turned his attention away from Trump and his inner circle, but towards Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that he has played Donald Trump here. And this is what he said on his War Room podcast just today.
You have the gall, particularly of what this guy did for you and the grief he's taken over here. You had the gall when he said, this is what I've done, and I need you to be a partner. I need you to stand down. First, here's where I can't stop at all, which is another lie of the many lies we've gotten from the Netanyahu government.
And so what I think is interesting about what Steve Bannon was saying there about his anger towards Netanyahu, and what you heard from Donald Trump on the White House lawn today, use an expletive about Benjamin Netanyahu. I spoke to a foreign policy analyst this morning who said they haven't heard that public anger from an American president towards Israel ever, if not decades, since Eisenhower. And I think we have to remember that that public anger has come out from months of distrust between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump. When Benjamin Netanyahu went to the White House in February, Trump sort of lectured him on Iran. Donald Trump did not go to Israel when he went to the Middle East back in May, and Israel said even go to Qatar, which he did do. So what will be interesting in the coming days is not just what happens with Iran and the possible negotiations, but Donald Trump's anger at Israel.
Thanks, Kieran. Now, in the last hour, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian has been giving a televised address, hailing what he called a great victory, while Iranian officials said the country has already begun rebuilding the areas damaged by Israeli strikes over the last 12 days. But the authorities have also been rounding up people they accuse of being Israeli-backed spies and saboteurs. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, reports.
Airstrikes before the ceasefire, in the darkness before dawn. The regime brought supporters out onto the streets of Tehran to celebrate what they portrayed as a victory. And then, confusion. We've disguised our interviewee's identity for his own safety.
When I heard the news of the ceasefire, I was happy to hear things are going to stop, but it didn't last. After a few hours, I heard news that Iran was launching projectiles to Israel, which was later denied by Iranian officials. I heard a few blasts in Tehran.
Israel claimed it had destroyed Tehran's clock, counting down to the predicted destruction of the Jewish state. But this morning it remained intact. The Islamic Republic has been humiliated, but it survives, as apparently does the supreme leader.
Right now, my biggest fear, and that of 90% of Iranians, is that this regime survives. That we are left with a devastated country, a wounded regime bearing a grudge, and their forces who feel entitled to do whatever they want.
Some say it's already happening. Here, a man suspected of being a Mossad agent is brought before a judge. Several hundred people are believed to have been picked up for spying in the last 12 days.
Cases related to security and specifically connected to the regime should be processed accurately and according to the law. However, in the light of the war situation, they should be treated as urgent and fast-tracked.
Tonight, the Iranian president is reported to have said he was willing to resolve issues with the US, presumably through talks, but gave no guarantees and was certainly not admitting defeat. In 2003, 6 weeks after invading Iraq and overthrowing Saddam Hussein, President George W. Bush famously declared, "Mission accomplished."
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended.
2 decades of insurgency, kidnapping and jihadism followed. Now, despite President Trump's claim to have obliterated Iran's nuclear program, experts say Iran might not only have secreted 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium and some limited capacity to build a bomb, but also concluded that going nuclear is their best defense. The supreme leader, aged 86 and not in the best of health, cannot last forever. But no one knows what will come next. Maybe a popular uprising, maybe chaos, or maybe the military commanders who have replaced those killed by Israel on the first day will be determined to rebuild Iran's military strength and hit back.
Well, joining me now is James Rubin. He was a senior State Department official under Presidents Biden and Clinton and is now co-host of the podcast The X-Files. James, to hear the president's supporters, it's a bit like one of his old beauty pageants. It's like he's achieved world peace. What's he actually achieved?
Well, ironically, what President Trump has achieved is to destroy a capability in Iran that never should have been a danger. Had he not pulled out of the agreement that was struck by President Obama in his first term, that agreement gave us real confidence that Iran couldn't build a nuclear weapon. We would have had years of notice if they really tried to break out. That agreement was working, and he promised to replace it with something. He never replaced it with anything. And then Iran began to threaten a nuclear capability, increased its capacity, increased its uranium to 60%, increased its quantities. That made Iran a threat. So, in a sense, he's, putting out a fire that he started by pulling out of the agreement. But I think it's worth pointing out that all of this warfare in Gaza, in the region, in Lebanon, in Syria, and now in Iran is all a reaction that has begun by Hamas's attack on October 7th. Israel was severely harmed by that attack and has now gone step by step by step to go at those who were responsible for it. President Trump's involvement was really about the nuclear issue, and I don't think he resolved the problem. We now have a real prospect of a covert Iranian nuclear program. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope that all this use of force is now married to some real diplomacy, but it will take a lot more time to get there, and we certainly haven't gotten there yet.
There's real confusion here about the strength of American intelligence assessments, which the president seemed to dismiss himself, about the Iranian nuclear program and the bomb damage that they have done. Now, from what you saw when you were in office, how reliable is the intelligence?
Well, it's very important to be very precise in talking about Iran's nuclear program, and so bear with me. There's two issues. One is, are they capable of making enough enriched nuclear material, uranium, to 90% in order to make a weapon. And that they were on the verge of doing. The second category is what you call weaponization, taking that material and putting it into a weapon that's got an implosion device and then testing that weapon. That is something that, as far as I know, as of 6 months ago, was not going on. And the intelligence community statements in recent weeks confirm that there's no new information on that. So this was not a case of an urgent need to stop an urgent rush to a nuclear weapon. But on the other hand, Iran was brandishing their nuclear capability. They were bragging about how close they were. They were doing something they didn't need to do for civilian nuclear purposes. So their chickens are coming home to roost. They didn't have to do this. And the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, just before Israel strikes, declared them in non-compliance with their requirements to allow inspectors to know what they're doing. So Iran has responsible. Trump is responsible for pulling out of the diplomatic agreement. The intelligence hasn't changed, as best as I can tell. You can always take intelligence and manipulate it and exaggerate it. I believe that's what the Israelis have done, and I believe that's what the president has done. But he's right that Iran was threatening to develop a nuclear weapon, and that's Iran's own fault for doing so.
James Rubin, thank you very much. Well, earlier I spoke to Anshel Pfeffer, Israel correspondent for The Economist, who's in Jerusalem, and I began by asking him what he makes of today's developments from Washington.
We've seen how Donald Trump from afar gave the orders to the American bombers to make one strike, and with that took ownership of this war. I mean, this was a war that Israel began 12 days ago, and Donald Trump is now very clearly the man calling the shots and calling time.
But Netanyahu will present this as a huge victory, won't he? I mean, I just asked a source in the Prime Minister's office for some background, and the text came back, blah, blah, and blah, we won.
Well, I think that Netanyahu had, with some justification, can call this a win. It achieved its aims. Israel set out to remove what it called the existential threat of Iran's nuclear program and ballistic missile project, and both those projects have been significantly damaged, not destroyed, but probably we could say it's set back by years.
How does this change the war in Gaza, if at all?
That is up to Donald Trump, and certainly he could. And we do know that before this war with Iran, he has urged, and his representative Steve Witkoff has urged Netanyahu to accept ceasefire. And before this war began 13 days ago, we were hearing from both Israeli and American officials that they weren't that far away from reaching the deal with Hamas. Now, Hamas has lost in Iran its biggest backer, Iran. I don't think we'll have the capacity anymore in the foreseeable future to back Hamas, and Hamas needs a ceasefire. The question is now, what will Netanyahu do? Will he use the political capital he's acquired over the last 12 days within Israel to refuse the demands of his far-right coalition partners to let Israel continue the war in Gaza until complete occupation and annexation? Or will he try and brazen it out? And I think we're back to where we began this interview, that a lot of it depends on Donald Trump.
How will his analysis, his intemperate analysis of what's been happening this morning, go down in Israel? I mean, when he says these two people have been at it so hard they don't know whatever they're doing, there's some truth to that, isn't there?
Well, it certainly has taken a bit of the shine out of Netanyahu's victory, this smackdown from Donald Trump. As you mentioned, the F-bomb that the president dropped on the White House, even before Trump chastised Netanyahu in public. I wouldn't have said Netanyahu has totally regained the entire Israeli public. We've seen in a couple of polls during the war that many Israelis still hold him responsible for the failure of October 7, for other failures on his watch. So I don't think he's totally redeemed himself.
Just finally, I mean, throughout this last few days, in Gaza, every day people have gone to these food collection points and been killed. Is that even being noticed in Israel, and does it have any impact at all?
Well, I think all the eyes in Israel have been over the last 12 days on what's been happening with Iran. Israel is still in its trauma of October 7, even though it's been now over 20 months. And I don't think most Israelis are that minded to see the casualties of the other side. I think I think it's an unrealistic expectation from any nation to take into, to be as empathetic as you from London or from Washington expect them to be.
Anshel Pfeffer, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Christian.